Hello and welcome to Make a Difference, the show devoted to volunteers and volunteerism in Montgomery County. I'm your host, Bonnie Jo Ayers. Montgomery County is fortunate to have a system of public parks that offer a wide variety of leisure and educational opportunities for residents and visitors of all ages and interests. Further enhancing the nature of some of the parks are historic sites that present and preserve the county's past in interesting ways to new generations. And in just a minute, you'll hear about some fun, educational volunteer opportunities at these historic sites in our Montgomery parks. But first, here's some other volunteer opportunities available in Montgomery County. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Make a Difference. I'm your host, Bonnie Jo Ayers. Joining us to talk about volunteer opportunities with Montgomery County Parks are Shirl Spicer, Montgomery Parks Museum Manager, and Parks volunteer Karl Smith. Shirl, Karl, welcome to Make a Difference.
Thank you.
Well, you have an interesting story to tell. As I said in the opening, everybody knows about the park systems and different parks they may live near or go to a lot, but there's this other whole aspect going on that's very interesting within the parks, and it's the historic sites. Tell us about your section that really deals with these historic sites and its importance.
Okay. The section that I work with is a Cultural Resources Stewardship section. We're part of a larger division of Park Planning and Stewardship. And within our section, what we're charged with within the park system is the stewardship, literally, of the historic properties and structures and the archaeological sites and objects that range from buildings to boundary stones to graveyard cemeteries, buildings that are sometimes open to the public, and then those that are just reminders of a time past that may not be open to the public. We're charged with making sure that they're inventoried, that they are accessible by some means to the public, perhaps via research or access and use of the building, and then we interpret our historic sites within the park system, which is primarily what I do, is work with public interpretation of a few of the historic sites that are open to the public, where they can come and tour.
That's really a key aspect to this whole operation and this focus on history is you have it, we preserved it in some way or are preserving it and appreciate it and finding others, I'm sure, as you go along. But then the bottom line is to get the word out to the public so they can appreciate
Right.
and really get a better sense of our history.
Absolutely.
How much time would you say is and resources are devoted to that particular aspect?
Hourly basis,
Okay.
weekly basis.
Yeah, ongoing.
Ongoing, we are around the clock, multiple hours, and we have a small staff that are dedicated. We have a staff archaeologist, a couple of part-time archaeologists within my area that handles museum management. I'm the sole staff, but we have a number of volunteers. We've got about 20 within the historic sites area. Our archaeology is truly supported by about 80 volunteers.
That's what I read. I didn't realize there was that aspect. So that
Yes.
leads very well into the topic of why you're here is volunteers. And it sounds like, I think you've just told us in no uncertain terms, that they really make it happen for the staff.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, you guys are invaluable. They are so invaluable to us. We couldn't do what we do. We couldn't open the sites to the public without our volunteers. We wouldn't be able to do our historical investigations of our archaeological sites throughout parks without the assistance of volunteers. It couldn't happen.
Well, how are they used? You've gotten into some of like the archaeology volunteers. I had no idea that there was that type of program. Coming into sort of a specialized field like that, do they need to have some kind of background, or is it just a willingness to learn and are interested? Or how, for instance, would you recruit volunteers for the archaeology?
Okay. First of all, what they do. Within the historic areas, our volunteers provide interpretation in the area of doing guided tours. We have a unique Underground Railroad experience trail hike, for which Karl is one of our volunteer conductors, and they provide guided hikes along a natural surface trail. They provide hands-on activities, and they'll lead those crafts and demonstrations at certain special events at our parks, and they'll help with research. We have a couple of volunteers that are working within the office that are helping our historian and our architectural historical staff work on research.
Well, that's good to know, because of course in history that's very important, but I'm sure that you find people who don't necessarily feel they can go out and or want to interact with others well and be on the front line.
Right.
But yet there's this very important function to be served, because that sort of is the engine that drives some of these programs.
Absolutely.
So that's interesting. So there is a variety, and I would assume all ages.
Yes, we have, starting with our interpretive program, we like to begin at about 16. And with some activities for special events, we'll take volunteers as young as 14. And then there is no age limit as to how big our big kids get. There's no
Just
age limit
interest
at all.
and ability and
interest and ability, background. We're fortunate we get a number of very diverse volunteers that are coming and lending a lot of expertise from their professional backgrounds in management, history, your teaching. Right now with Montgomery College, we have homemakers, we have former teachers that are coming, some retirees, some folks that are still working or had retired, returning back to work and still lend a little bit of time to us with parks. So we recruit from all areas, college students and high school students occasionally have come and helped out.
Good.
So
Well,
wide range.
Well, let's, now that you've sort of whetted our appetite, so to speak, let's give a phone number, and there's a website that, of course, the website magic word these days, where you can always get more information, but if you can give a phone number and the website.
Specifically for historic sites, it's historyintheparks.org.
Okay.
And then to register online to be a volunteer, it's parksvolunteers.org. And if they want to contact, my number is 301-650-4373. And then our Parks general line for volunteer information is 301-495-2504.
A lot of good information there. That there's no excuse for not being able to contact you. In other words,
you can reach us.
Well, now you've mentioned Karl, and Karl is one of those frontline people we were talking about, who is really out there. And we were talking before the show. You've been doing this for a little while, but you play two roles, and
that's right.
This is very. Tell us about your characters and your interpretation of these.
Well, it grows, and that's one of the excitements about doing this. I started out as an Underground Railroad conductor for the Underground Railroad experience out in Sandy Springs. And basically, I remember our initial training with Shirl, and just talking about the different aspects of Underground Railroad and Maryland history that we could talk about as we go along on this 2-mile hike through the woods out there. And what each conductor usually does is they start to, once they get that interest whetted, they start to develop their own sort of repertoire, different stories that they could tell, different little pieces, different things, realia, I would call it in teaching, different things that people can touch and see. One of the guides has a set of shackles that were used to transport slaves from one place to another in the antebellum period. I have a piece of beef jerky, which I bring along just to remind our guests of the difficulty in that we're going to have to find food, we're going to have to find water, we're going to have to really live on our wits. If you're really thinking as somebody who's seeking freedom on the Underground Railroad. So those are the things we've just developed over time. And then after a couple of years of that, Shirl graduated us, encouraged us, provoked us into thinking about being reenactors, thinking about assuming a character and bringing that extra dimension to what we do on the Underground
And the
Railroad.
character you have, Reverend Green, I believe, from the Eastern Shores,
That's right.
has quite a story.
That's right. Reverend Sam Green was actually a freedman in Eastern Shore, Maryland. He'd been freed because his master had put in his will that Sam Green would be freed after a certain number of years of service after the master died. But Sam didn't want to wait. Sam purchased his own freedom. What a lot of freed people were able to do was to purchase their freedom by selling their labor to a neighbor who needed wood cutting or somebody who needed help building a shed or that kind of thing. So Sam did that. So he was a free man. But his wife and his children were enslaved. And what happened was one of his children, his son, did use the Underground Railroad and escaped to Canada. That immediately put Sam Green under suspicion of being a collaborator on this Underground Railroad thing. And the sheriff in the Eastern Shore, Dorchester County, had Sam Green put in jail after they found that he owned contraband. In that period of time, we're talking late 1850s, contraband consisted of things like Uncle Tom's Cabin, a book, right? A very famous, well-known novel that described for people what the experience of being a slave was. So Sam had that book. He had letters from his son in Canada, and that was enough evidence for the judge to give him a 10-year sentence, which he served about 5 years of. And he was released after those 5 years. The governor pardoned him after 5 years and said, you're being released on the condition that you leave Maryland. So he went to Canada for a while. Then after the war, he came back.
Now, where do you portray this character?
I do this as a part of the Underground Railroad experience. So right here in Sandy Springs, even though my character is from the Eastern Shore, we work it in that he could be on his way going through Montgomery County, and he can answer questions to people about what happened to him, why was he imprisoned, what happened to his children, that sort of thing. And he speaks very, talking about in third person is me.
But no, that's getting, that's getting
he
into
speaks very eloquently about that experience of why you would want freedom and the conditions of slavery. Even if you had a kind master, how that system of bondage kept you from being a full person.
And very quickly, because we are running out of time, what kind of time commitment does this take?
Well, I volunteer at least once a month, and it's a Saturday morning for 2 to 3 hours minimum. And
couldn't be better. And I
Yes.
feel like I'm cutting off the story in the middle, but that hopefully will get people out to hear the rest of the
hope
story.
so. I hope they
And
Come this weekend.
Yes.
Come
Well,
Heritage Days,
well,
come
and-
night hikes.
Well,
Yes.
we
and
do in the fall.
all sorts of things coming up. We'll have to have you back.
Yes.
Shirl, Karl, thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
being
much.
with
Thank you.
us.
Thanks, Bonnie.
You've just heard from Shirl Spicer and Karl Smith about volunteer openings at historic sites within Montgomery parks. To become involved with this or other local volunteer organizations or projects, call the Volunteer Center at 240-777-2600 or visit their website at www.montgomeryserves.org. And remember, as a volunteer, you can make a difference. Bye-bye.
County Cable Montgomery, your information station.